My mother was dead. Of that they were quite certain. They said it was sudden, that it happened in her sleep, and that she felt no pain. They said other things, comforting things, and when they felt it was permissible, they left. They left me with my grief and the entirety of my mother's estate. Estate makes it sound grand, like she had left a sprawling southern mansion with gardens and horse barns, when in fact, everything she owned was accounted for by a key sealed in a tiny manila envelope. It was the key to a small yellow colonial in the middle of the New England woods. It was an old house. When my family landed here, they set to imposing human comforts on the wilderness, and they had succeeded, but nature threatened to reclaim what little land we had carved. The forests were dark here, and my mom used to tell me they were different than other woods. She said they had a history that hung heavy and bowed the branches. She told me that no one is ever safe in the woods. Even when the forest is quiet, it's only because it's waiting. She never told me for what. I stood in front of the house, my old, new house. It was smaller than I remembered, and it looked crooked and wrong. It was weather-beaten and was beginning to look like it had grown out of the earth. It sat in the shadow of a large hill, and even though it was only 5 o'clock, it was dark inside. I tried to turn on a light, but the power was out. It usually was out here. My mother had always preferred the light of candles anyway. It gave me the peculiar habit of always carrying matches. I struck one against the doorframe and lit a tiny gray stunted candle half melted on a pewter dish. The inside of the house was much like I remembered it, almost eerily so. It looked untouched by time, and it was hard to believe that my mother had been living in it. There was no evidence of her life. No books on the nightstand, no food in the cabinets, not even scuffs, scratches, or mystery stains. Unnervingly, the only change was heavy steel locks bolted to the inside of every door. I searched every inch of the house, but the only thing resembling food that I could find was a bottle of J&B whiskey. I poured a healthy glass and went upstairs hoping to find comfort and sleep. I stopped at the inside of the door and locked it. I felt silly, but there are a few things more comforting than being on the safe side of a locked door. And it was around midnight that I heard it. It was a strange, heavy shuffling of something that was much too big for the narrow hall. It dragged itself, making long, scraping noises against the oak floor that were steadily getting closer. I heard a tap on the door, hesitant, courteous, like it didn't want to be intrusive, and it whispered in an old language soft words that ended with cutting punctuation. The noises grew louder, and they began to feel like they were coming from all directions, drawing patterns on the walls. Something that sounded like claws dragged down the length of the door and stopped. I heard the doorknob turn and the lock strain against it, and then silence. I sat motionless even hours after it was gone. I didn't move until morning broke. There were splinters on the floor and large chips of wood that had been gouged out by the beast. The hall, the ceiling, the door, they were all covered in etchings and arcane symbols. On the wall opposite my bedroom, It had carved a mural of bodies twisting in on themselves, their eyes bulging, trees tearing flesh from their faces and backs. It was beautiful and horrifying, and I think I was meant to understand something from it, but all I could do was trace the patterns of their agony. I don't know how long I stared, but it was dark outside now. I could hear the trees calling my name outside. They sounded so friendly. Their lips formed the words deliciously, savoring every syllable. I went to them. It would be rude not to. They were gnarled and bone-white, anchored to the sod by knotted roots that licked at my ankles and drew tiny streams of blood. I hardly noticed. I walked for a very long time. I passed many animals, most of them dead and rotted. Their bodies were barely visible through deep clouds of flies and maggots. Their buzzing overwhelmed the sound of birds. The ground was covered in thick moss that climbed the bases of the trees. It felt like walking in wet sand, and it would frequently swallow my foot, and I would have to strain to free myself. I came to a bog. The water was black and stagnant. It reflected the trees on its surface, but distorted them like a funhouse mirror. I dipped my toe in, and it was unnaturally cold. The trees spoke gentle encouragement. I walked into the swamp. My clothes bubbled around me. It was deep in the middle, and I could barely touch bottom while still keeping my head above the sulfurous water. Something that felt like a leech, but one the size of a large snake, wrapped itself around my leg and dragged me under. The water engulfed me, and I was suspended for a moment in total darkness. And I broke the surface, but the water still clung to me in thick, viscous strands. I saw it on the other side of the pond, watching me. It was much bigger than I had guessed, and composed of twisted flesh, mouths and eyes and teeth. It was human and animal put in a blender, the resulting paste sculpted into the stuff of nightmares. I crawled out of the water and looked up at it towering over me. The forest was quiet. It raised its tattered wings and embraced me, enveloping me in its soft, wrinkled flesh. It spoke, and the sound came from everywhere. It was deep and cavernous, and it said simply,